as fueling an industry. And then we look at a simple equation of economics, which is supply and demand. And when there's demand, somebody will supply it. And so we look at some really unique challenges, and harm to parrots in captivity is an area where most of us are more familiar. I know many of you on the call, I recognize some names and know some of you personally, but those of us in rescue, those of us working in sanctuaries, those of us in the veterinary profession working with birds, and many of us that are just bird owners that are all coming together because of how important this topic is. And to most of us, I mean, bird lives really matter. So I'm grateful, and I commend all of you for being here. And I thank you for the opportunity to spend some time speaking today. This session will go like the initial session, but you can see the ties into how birds in captivity tie to harm in the wild. So this is really the big issue. This is the problem we're facing. You know, pets are more popular than ever. And we know that especially since the COVID pandemic, even more people wanted birds and people wanted companions. And unfortunately, many of those were not kept past the pandemic. And it led to issues of increased pet ownership and what we deal with, which is the increase in nowhere for them to go. If you look at some of the statistics here, and the millions of pets owned and the billions of dollars spent, but that final statement here estimates that there are about 8.3 million pet birds living in US homes. Now, it's difficult to get an exact count, and that's thought to be a minimum number. But again, that's the issue, and that's what we're facing as we talk about birds and how are birds different? What do they need in captivity? Well, we've already established that their captive care requirements can't be met, that even with our best efforts, we're going to fall short. And this is probably too complex for the majority of pet owners. Now, there are people who talk about going above and beyond to provide the right and the best care for their pets. But again, it may be too complex for most people. Can we recognize pain and suffering? Can we honestly evaluate quality of life? Do we have the skills and abilities and the knowledge to really understand how much these birds are suffering when they're kept as pets and kept in captivity? What about access to veterinary care and the lack of that? I noticed somebody in the chat put a comment about needing more avian vets, which is something we hear about, and that's the area that I work in, but you know, that is a separate issue from the captive needs and the captive care and what's missed with a lot of these birds. Our knowledge base, our abilities to care for them and providing what they need make these unique challenges and why birds are so different. Again, we'll hear a lot of recurrent sort of facts and comments and subtopics as we get through this summit. But I always like to remind everyone, this is the largest population of captive wildlife. These are wild animals, and many of us, like myself, very strongly believe wild animals belong in the wild. If those videos that were just played before this session started got to any of you, many of you like me sitting here bawling my eyes out, it hits in the heart, and it's what we feel, and it's why we're all here, and it's what we need to stop. These are captive wild animals, and they don't belong in our homes, and they should not be pets. They're not domesticated. People try to convince us of that. They're not domesticated animals, and their behavioral needs, even when bred and raised in captivity, remain intact and are often unmet. Few things to remember as well is there are more threatened and endangered species of parrots than most any other families of birds in the wild. These animals suffer greatly in the wild, as we've talked about. Ecosystems, damage to people, nature, surrounding areas, just the concept of burning down a field to poach those baby birds is destroying the environment in an attempt to meet this demand. So we are in a crisis, and I know some people may react to that word because it sounds very extreme, and we think about what actually defines a crisis, but anybody on this call and anybody listening to the information today and tomorrow should understand this is a crisis. In the past, we've often heard the terms tragedy. We've heard just some extremes of this, and we're seeing significant issues relating to captive care and welfare. When we try to think about positives, we're all here because there is an increased interest and concern for parrots being kept in captivity. We're all here because we want to do something about this. We're here because we need to take action. We need to educate. We need to spread the word. And summits like this are one of the best ways to start doing that. We have a better understanding of biology and behavior. I mean, you saw from those videos, there's nothing more beautiful than seeing birds in the wild where they belong, seeing these parrots free. But the more we know, the more we can understand what welfare is and how it's compromised and lead the fight towards better understanding. Most of us that have birds or are around birds know there are significant aspects of behavior that are denied in captivity. The core fundamentalness of being a bird and existing in the wild is blocked on almost every level when they're in a small cage in a small apartment, ignored most of the day living by themselves. So we're talking about serious welfare and conservation challenges, and we're talking about a desire to move forward into ways of banning the desire, banning the trade, and changing the entire captive bird paradigm. A note on conservation, and just a reminder, the Wild Bird Conservation Act in 1992 banned the importation of many species of captured birds. The human fascination with parrots, birds in general, goes back thousands of years. We know that early explorers traveled the world and brought parrots back, not knowing how to care for them or raise them or feed them. People have kept birds. If you look through art history, you'll see parrots in Renaissance paintings, and you'll see birds, as Laura Kim mentioned, in places they never existed before. They've been moved all around the world, but we banned the importation of captured birds, and many people think that fueled the need for captive breeding. Many people think this might be around the time that the boom in aviculture came about. This was the time where supply and demand changed, and somebody needed to meet that demand. So now we have so much more captive breeding and production, but in no way has that shown to stop the poaching and the illegal or legal wildlife trade and the desire to still bring these birds in and kidnap them from their homes where they want to thrive. It's been a significant problem, and parrot species are suffering devastating losses. We heard from our first speaker about the populations in Mexico, the number of birds that are endangered, that are threatened, habitat loss. Somebody in the chat wrote earlier, if this continues, we're going to lose these birds. Future generations won't have them. And, you know, comments like that are not to upset us, although my heart breaks every time I hear that and say that. But they're the facts of what we're dealing with here. And in order to get people to understand this, we have to work with an emotional but fact-based sharing of information. Habitat destruction, consumption of natural resources, destruction of indigenous peoples' cultures. I mean, this is so much more far-reaching. And the interconnection of all of this is what we're discussing and why we're here today. There's a number of studies that have come out trying to look at poaching and the illegal wildlife trade. We know it's very difficult. We know we can't get a lot of that information. We know that governments don't store it or reveal it. Even our own US organizations may or may not have accurate records, or those may not be available. So actually knowing the data and the numbers and the counts is really, really challenging. But poaching for the wild bird trade plays a huge role in the global decline of parrot populations in the wild. We want to stop the trade. We want these birds to be in the wild. We believe that they should be seen in the wild. They are far more beautiful wild. We want to stop the keeping of pet birds in cages, and we want to move through our understanding of how harm to parrots in captivity occurs. So we have some great speakers coming up in this section that are going to share some different viewpoints of how harm to parrots in captivity really occurs. And then we'll follow through with some time for some questions and some panel discussion. And then we'll summarize before we go into our breakout groups at that point. So I'm going to begin this section by discussing some general information about birds in captivity. and some important information that we all need to think about and consider. Because again, what are the effects on people? What are the effects in the environment? But what are the effects on these birds as we watch them suffer? Harm to birds in captivity. So what is the harm? What do we keep talking about? What is this crisis? Why these words? Well, starting off with birds should not be pets. Whether you agree with that or not, and you find reasons why that may be a false statement, collectively, many of us believe that's the case. Many people in the pet industry acquire birds and know very little about them. They don't know their history, their psychology, their needs. They're not prepared to understand what it is to live with a parrot. It's shameful in some ways, and it's sad when we hear about impulse buying, or I, as a veterinarian, will sometimes ask somebody with a new pet bird, why did you get this bird? It was beautiful in the pet store, and I thought I would like to have it, never having considered own one before. Or I didn't like how it was in the store, so I bought it to rescue it. You know, the stories go on, but honestly, most people don't know enough about them to really even care for them and meet their needs. They're also not informed about the considerable fiscal, physical, emotional commitment to provide lifelong care to a highly social species. We had a mention in one of the previous videos about how historically it was thought that birds should be kept alone to force them to bond with people, that birds needed to be hand raised in order to teach them to imprint and socialize on a person, that they need their wings trimmed so you can train them. We've been fed mixed and inappropriate and just wrong information for so long that it's led to a lot of the problems we're dealing with today. And our goal is to try to change some of that. As a veterinarian for 23 years and working with birds for 22 of that, gives me a bit of clout to talk about the things that we see in captivity on a daily basis. Just poor care, inappropriate nutrition, lack of training, no exercise. I mean, if we did all of these things to a person, they would be considered the most heinous cruelty. If a mother was starving their children or keeping them locked in a basement, I mean, if you think about how we could make these dramatic parallels, you'd see how inappropriate all of this is. So poor understanding, poor training, and then the big topic, especially for those of you working in sanctuaries and rescues and many of these places, we have a culture of the ability to dump any pet we don't want as soon as we don't want it. And birds are one of the most rehomed birds. Sometimes in 2 or 3 years after somebody got them, they decide they no longer want them. So we have an ongoing problem with the rehoming, the relinquishment, the full sanctuaries, and with rescues being overburdened, and the concept that some of us have talked in the past about there's nowhere for them to go. Signs of stress in captive birds. What are the things we see? Some of these we think are just normal bird behavior. Some of these are the reasons that people don't want their birds after a while. They suddenly decide that they can't tolerate some of these things. But a lot of them are signs of captivity. A lot of them are signs of social isolation, confinement, fear. A comment was made in one of the videos that the most aggressive birds seen are those that are hand raised. And that has to mean something, and that has to tell you something, and that has to devalue the thoughts that go around that. When we see aggression, when we see fearful behaviors, when we see self-trauma and self-damage, those are extreme forms of stress and anxiety. There was a study done a few years ago, if people aren't aware, of why birds get relinquished, why we have this as a big part of our problem with harm and captivity. Why do people get rid of their birds? Why don't they want them after a period of time? What happened when they spent $3,000 to buy that beautiful scarlet macaw chick that 2 years later they're prepared to just give away to the first person that maybe will buy it on Craigslist, or they sneak it through Facebook Marketplace, however people move birds. You know, biting and aggression, noise, feather destruction, certain behaviors, but the number one is not enough time. And we hear that over and over and over. I didn't realize how much time it would need. I am choosing not to devote that much of my life to it. I didn't realize they would need this. Not enough time is one of the prevailing reasons why people decide to rehome or dump or drop their birds off at a shelter. And it's shameful when you think about it, because we never should have started that process. There's a little ad here from a newspaper article from, probably the 1940s selling talking parrots. And, prorating that, $5 wasn't cheap back then in the 1940s, but this is another part of it. We started moving birds in back even in the 1920s when it was fashionable and trendy and everybody needed to have a pet bird. And we started that demand and we started kidnapping them and bringing them in and selling them because everybody wanted a talking parrot. And believe it or not, people will dump their birds when they don't mimic and they don't talk. Where are they going? Well, this is where relinquished birds go: welfare organizations, individuals, breeders, foster care. Again, if you Google search avian rescue, you bring up millions of hits, and that means something as well. Well, what do we know birds deserve, to summarize here as we move into our other speakers? They deserve freedom from disease. As a veterinarian, adequate veterinary knowledge, veterinary care. The simple fact that birds are here right now and the ones here need the care we can provide for them, and we need to do what we can to improve their quality of life. We need to make sure that we can provide for these birds. Unfortunately, most of the data about birds as pets is harrowing. People don't spend a lot on bird care. They don't seek veterinary care until it's an emergency. And in my line of work, I see a lot of birds when it's too late and somebody's waited till we can't help them. And in their mind, that meant we couldn't help them, instead of the fact that they waited too long to get care. So it's an unfortunate part of it. Birds deserve freedom from discomfort. When they're in our homes, we need to know what their physical and environmental needs are, but we often can't meet that. They have very specific needs, very specific requirements, and their wild type behaviors are going to come out. You've also heard the comment today about even a tame, hand-raised, loving bird will reach puberty and will reach sexual maturity. And then all bets are off with their behavior and changes and desires. Wild animals want to find a mate and procreate. I tell my clients all the time, birds want to, build a nest, lay some eggs, raise a family, and repeat. And we stop that amongst all of the things that we block them from doing. And then we wonder why people want to relinquish them. So this filters down into the harm that we're seeing to these birds. We talk a lot about cages. We talk a lot about birds and their freedoms and their rights. And we talk about imprisonment. We talk about birds. The only suitable size cage is when a bird doesn't know it's in one, and I don't even know if that's still fair, because we honestly really do want to move towards the concept of no cages. We need to have solutions to all of these problems. We need to make sure people who have birds understand the complex needs, the care they should be providing, their obligation to these birds, making sure they have the relationships with people, avian veterinarians, nursing care, specialty stores, the right people, the right information, and the places to go for that. We have to put this responsibility as the pet owner and on the pet owner for the birds that are here.
Okay,
Again,
now, Anthony, I'm interrupting you for another reason, which is we're going over on time. So
okay.
Just letting you know.
Thanks. I'm just going to summarize in my last two slides. Thank you. So again, think of solutions, think about total living environments, and time to rethink the cage. Remember, birds fly. It's their thing. It's what they do. It's what they need. There are more studies than ever now showing that the potential health impacts of not letting birds fly, that might be what we need to convince the world and convince the bird owning community to stop wing trimming and to start letting birds fly and to let them get this only form of exercise. We also know, again, no cage is big enough. We shouldn't be deflighting these birds, and we need to rethink methods of caring for them in captivity. I think everybody can look at this picture at the bottom and realize that's inhumane and unfair and should never happen, but it happens the world over, and it's a serious concern. Birds flock. Social isolation has been proven to cause severe psychological trauma. We know that in so many animals, and birds are no different from that. So they're wired for a connection to a partner in a flock, and it's something we need to consider as they continue to suffer harm in captivity. And my last mention here is just a reminder to people that the Animal Welfare Act as of last year, does now cover birds in captivity. Birds have had really no legal protections until this was finally brought into order. I think the important thing to understand is it's a complex issue. There's a lot that goes into it. But having moved into 2023 for the first time ever, we at least see enough awareness and appreciation and interest in caring for birds that the USDA moved forward with the Animal Welfare Act finally covering birds. It's not perfect, but it is a huge positive step towards better welfare for our captive birds. Again, there's a lot of scientific methods to look at welfare for anybody interested in any of these. These exist elsewhere, but these are the scientific methods to understand how we can truly assess welfare in our captive birds. And again, this is a complex issue and can be a conversation and a topic entirely on its own. And then a small snapshot of what we see, the neglect, the harm to birds in captivity, the birds that don't get routine care, those birds that suffer with broken bones and feather destructive behavior and ingestion of toxins in foreign bodies, cancer that goes untreated. Unfortunately, it may just be a small snapshot, but it illustrates the concept of what we're dealing with when we talk about harm to parrots in captivity. These animals are not free to decide. They don't have free will. They are restricted. Their lives are in many, many ways immeasurably reduced. And with the loss of respect, they lose a lot of that. And it's unfortunate that we take away the free will of these birds. Thank you for your attention. I appreciate that.
Okay, so as we did last time, I'm going to pause between presentations to see if people have any comments, questions, experiences of their own to share about what you just heard. I know that particular presentation was very focused on the US, and we do have people here from Canada and India as well. Actually, I'm a little curious in your countries if there's any legislation like the Animal Welfare Act that Anthony spoke about at the end. Is there anything like that in Canada or in India that you know of?
In Canada, for example, he was talking about the bird that the bird should fly, but like last week or 2 weeks ago, like a city in Quebec, like another city, just make the promotion of a new breeder, and she was cutting the wings, and that was in the big message, the promotion of the breeders. And this is the city which is doing this promotion. So we try to make them erase this, and they didn't want to. And we are far. We are like really not in the. How can I say in English? Sorry. Dans les droits de l'oiseau, on est loin d'être dans côté réglementation. Là.
Well, we have a law in Quebec about animal welfare, and birds are included in that law, but it's complicated on the field since they are under another minister jurisdiction. They're with wild animal, so it's really complicated to apply these laws in captivity, and more. There's no registration about breeding. There's no breeding program or law. Anybody can breed parrots in their basements or whatever. There's really no legislation about that, so that's a big problem.
Wow. Yeah, well, as Anthony said, it is complicated even here. I mean, it's far from perfect. I don't know if you're aware of any laws in India, Sahithya?
So we do have some laws. There is one for Prevention of Animal Cruelty Act or something, and there is one for wildlife protection as well. The problem is it is not enforced. So that is the thing. Like conservationists and actors, they'll go in, they'll fight, and they'll move the courts and make sure those particular cases are taken care of. But in general, we don't have any. I mean, we would have offices, but you're not aware because it's just for namesake, right? So
Right,
people are, I mean, last year, my state started, I mean, no, what do you call it? Like there is a law enforcing the law against capturing native birds like Indian ringnecks. So then, only then people knew that each district has these forest department officers that we can go and surrender the birds to and all that. So there was an injured squirrel that I had to try and find in mine is a one of the bigger cities in my state, but we didn't have enough information where to go and surrender. So the issue is we have laws, but the enforcement is not proper. There is no awareness among people, and even the government doesn't seem to give that much of uh, focus on making people aware of these facilities being available.
right. Yeah, that's a common theme, unfortunately. How about you, Sunny, in Mexico? Are you aware of, I know that Juan Carlos spoke about it a little bit last week, but
Yeah, they have laws about poaching and taking animals and birds in particular from the wild, and that's not allowed. And that was probably 25 years ago. And then in 2008, they made it illegal to keep any birds that are Mexican natives. So for birds, like a lot of the Amazons are native to Mexico, it's illegal to keep them as pets. But again, they don't have enough people to go and enforce anything. If somebody's reported and it's an abuse situation, they can send in the environmental people to take the bird, and then it comes to like Proyecto Santa Maria. But there's just not enough people to enforce any of the laws for the birds. So, and they still have people like breeding lovebirds and cockatiels and the smaller birds that are not native, and that they're almost like it's almost like a throwaway bird kind of mentality.
yes. I don't know if Ron or Adrian, do you want to add anything? Any thoughts about what you might have learned or information you know? And you don't have to if you don't want to.
No, I'm really not much of a parrot person. I'm just curious about all of this, but I keep drawing parallels like throughout the whole series, not just what we're talking about now, but thinking about everything from children and and from people and abuse and marketing to all of the animals, and also keep wondering about the economics that is driving the need for, like, who are these people who need to make their money this way, and why do they need to make their money this way, or what kind of culture did they grow up in that created the marketers of this? So that's the question I keep thinking about in my mind.
We will be diving more into that in our next session, which focuses on how harm to parrots hurts people as well. But I will say, in some of our projects in Latin America, some of the poachers, these are poor people who are also marginalized often. And it's a way for them to earn an income. And the amount they earn is not that much. The birds then go to a middleman who, that's when they start to make more money. And a lot of times it's people who just don't care about nature. It's no different than drug trafficking or illegal logging or whatever. It's a way to make a lot of money. And they see the birds as things, as commodities, not as living beings. But it's immensely complicated. How about you, Ron? I saw you unmuted for a second there.
Yeah, yeah. As far as there's a lot of people. When I lived in Seattle, there were a lot of people that weren't poor that thought they were entrepreneurs. And when they looked out to see what would be the easiest way to make money, they saw $300, $400, $500 birds sitting in a pet shop and thought, I can do that. And they'd buy a Connex, one of those windowless transports you see stacked on ships, and they would put a couple lights in it and run some cages in it, and voila, they would start trying to sell them to local pet shops. And I don't know. So I think the trend with our law that just happened, basically you have no law, then you have a law, then you have enforcement, and then you have perhaps some remediation issues. If you have that enforcement, you start collecting birds, you don't know where they came from. So there's some remediation, restitution possibilities. That's sort of the trend of what happens. And having a law is a better start than no law, but that enforcement piece is huge. And there's a lot. I'm not sure our law is going to have a whole lot of enforcement either.
Right.
That's APHIS has a history of making laws and not enforcing. So there's no real structure for enforcing things that happen to animals. Animals are pretty low on the horizon for us. But anyway, that's a couple of things to add there. That's all.
And Ron, if you could just introduce yourself, because the rest of us, we've been together for a couple of weeks.
Yeah, I wasn't able to. This is kind of early in Alaska, so on a weekend. So I've had to watch the tapes. But I'm Ron Britton. I actually am a trained biological oceanographer, but over the years have gotten into emergency response and for oil spills particularly, and that brings in a lot of wild birds. So I've dealt with birds all my life, and certainly from the emergency side, you see some of the aspects that humans do to birds that we have to remediate. And at least in that arena, there's an opportunity to capture, remediate, and release. There's some processes that work pretty well there. And so I've been involved in that. I work for the Forest Service in Alaska. So.
Thank you. And I'll ask everyone else so we can keep going. Maybe put in the chat your name, where you are, and your connection to parrots as a way to introducing yourself to Ron.
Yeah, thanks so much, everybody. I really appreciate the group.
Yeah, and thank you for getting up early and joining us today. I apologize.
I made it. I was late, but I made it.
Yes. All right, so we're going to now move on to the next one, and I'll explain for you, Ron. Then our next presenter is, she's in Paraguay and she's speaking in Spanish. So if you're not familiar with the translation function in Zoom, if you go to captions, and then you want to show your captions and then toggle on the translation function, and the language you want to choose, in your case would be English, your native language. And then hopefully as you're watching, you'll see translation as we go. Unfortunately for me, when I'm sharing, I don't see my translation, but that's okay because I saw her present and I actually know her. She's one of our partners in One Earth's Conservation's work in Paraguay. Also, I forgot to turn on the recording earlier. So for those who are watching, I just want to let you know that the first speaker is Dr. Anthony Pilney, who's the medical director at the Arizona Animal Hospital here in the US. Okay, so now we're going to move on to Dr. Diana Pisol. And by the way, I will put in the chat a link to their bios. So if you want to look up and read more about these people, you can. So give me a second here to get this next one going.
Thank you for your attention. I appreciate that. Our first speaker, Diana's a wildlife veterinarian in Paraguay. She's head of a reintroduction project for the blue and yellow macaw, and she's a member of One Earth team assisting in the rehabilitation of confiscated parrots. And we'll turn it over to Diana.
Bueno, la verdad, muy impactada con todo lo que vimos ya desde que empezaron las presentaciones. Yo voy a hablar un poquito más de todo eso que vimos y voy a traerles una realidad que es la realidad de Paraguay, porque yo soy veterinaria de Paraguay, como dijo. Bueno, los puntos clave sobre bienestar que tenemos que saber viendo la vida de los loros silvestres y la vida de los loros mascota, y quienes trabajamos con loros silvestres sabemos que ellos tienen mucha actividad. 50% del día se pasan volando y buscando alimentos y forrajeando. 30% del día ellos están jugando con los miembros de su bandada y están interactuando entre ellos. Y 20% del día están descansando y acicalándose. Sin embargo, los loros mascota o los loros en cautiverio pasan 5 al 10% del día comiendo, porque es a veces solamente el momento donde se les acerca la comida. Pasan 5% del tiempo jugando con miembros de la bandada, muchas veces están solos y los miembros de su bandada son los humanos, que no les dan mucha atención. Y pasan 30% del tiempo descansando y acicalándose, pero acá falta un enorme porcentaje de tiempo para cubrir el día, y es que ellos pasan 55% del día aburridos. Entonces, esto es lo que lleva a muchos de los problemas que recién se mencionaron. ¿Y qué pasa en Paraguay específicamente? Y esta es una de las imágenes que ya se mostraron anteriormente. Pero en Paraguay los loros están en todas partes. Como dijo Kurt en el panel anterior, Paraguay es un lugar que tiene mucha biodiversidad, tiene muchos loros. Entonces, son comunes. La gente a veces los ve y como son comunes dicen, hay muchos. Tenemos 24 especies de loros. La ley en Paraguay permite la tenencia de loros mascota. Uno tiene que registrarles y ya está legal. No hay muchos veterinarios para loros, como ya se mencionó también anteriormente, y acá es impensable tener una certificación, un veterinario con especialización de un colegio americano o europeo. Eso no existe. La mayoría de las casas con loros tienen uno solo, entonces hay muchos problemas de relacionamiento y problemas de estrés por causa de que están solos y deberían estar en grupo. Y como ya dijeron también anteriormente, hay muy poco bienestar. Entonces, esta es la situación de la mayoría de las casas acá en Paraguay y así le tienen a sus loros. Entonces se puede ver que hay acá una sola percha, el comedero está sucio, la jaula es chica, el loro no está haciendo prácticamente nada, acá está sucio, esto es la misma situación, esto es de metal, muchas veces en el invierno.
I'm pausing because we have a new participant and I want him to be able to understand what's going on. So welcome, Richard. And yeah, it's obviously this presenter is speaking in Spanish. So what you want to do is go to where it says show captions or hide captions.
Yep, I got it.
You got it?
Hooked up,
Okay.
yeah,
And
thank
make
you.
sure it's set to English for you.
Got it.
Okay.
Thank you. You bet.
Sorry about that. Okay,
Oh,
we'll
sorry
go
about
back.
me coming late. I had a problem.
No problem. It's okay. Here we go.
Invierno a mí me tocó ver loros que están en el frío en un posadero de metal y ese posadero debe estar muy frío y lo mismo en el calor. Ese metal debe estar muy caliente porque acá las temperaturas son muy altas, entonces sufren aún más. Acá vemos otros, pero siempre lo que se repite en todos es que están solos. Aquí el agua está sucia, aquí hay girasol, generalmente las personas dan de comer solamente girasol en algunos casos. En otros casos le dan comida de humanos, le dan fideo, le dan maní, le dan muchas frutas y la dieta es muy diferente a la dieta que ellos consumen en vida libre. Algunos problemas de salud que vemos en la práctica veterinaria son los relacionados a este estrés excesivo. Se arrancan las plumas, inclusive llegando a la mutilación. Muchas veces en Paraguay, dependiendo de los lugares, no hay ni siquiera forma de saber si esto es a causa de alguna enfermedad sistémica o es puramente comportamental, porque de vuelta hay pocos veterinarios que puedan entender sobre la medicina de aves. Vemos también casos así que pueden ser deficiencias nutricionales o pueden ser problemas neurológicos. No tenemos medios para diagnosticar. Si esto, por ejemplo, fuera Newcastle, no tenemos cómo diagnosticar, no hay acceso a diagnósticos. Vemos ejemplares así que un día la persona dice que ya no le puede tener y dice que esto apareció el día de ayer, cuando que sabemos que esto es algo crónico que probablemente lleva muchos meses para instalarse. Entonces, este animal vivió siempre sobre este posadero, tenía problemas para posarse, tenía mucho dolor en las patas y bueno, le pudimos sacar el tumor, pero el animal igual tenía muchos problemas. Esto es lo que vemos siempre como veterinarios aquí. Además de eso, también, como dijo Kurt, Paraguay carece de muchos controles, entonces el tráfico acá es muy fuerte. Esto es lo que vemos en trabajos de vida libre que se hacen monitoreando pichones y vemos también cuando son saqueados y encontramos la evidencia. Acá vemos una noticia de cuando fueron incautados por las autoridades. Y muchas veces vemos esto, ¿verdad? Los traficantes tienen que echar los nidos y la mayoría de los pichones muere en ese proceso. Además de eso, yo hice unos recortes de grupos de WhatsApp donde están comercializando estos loros y el grupo la comercialización es abierta, ¿sí? Acá se puede ver inclusive el número de teléfono de las personas que estaban comercializando. Acá vemos una especie que es el loro cara amarilla, Lipiopsita santops. Vemos también guacamayos. Ellos comercializan abiertamente y realmente no hay em, mucha sanción, no hay muchos controles para esto. Y cuando llegan estos animales que sí pudieron ser parte de una incautación, de un decomiso por parte de la autoridad, llegan de esta forma. Llegan muy sucios, en malas condiciones, muy flacos, llegan con mucho miedo, se puede ver en esta foto, llegan con algunos problemas por el manejo que tuvieron, a veces pierden los dedos, a veces están tan deshidratados que a un pichón así de tan pocos días hay que hacerle procedimientos muy invasivos y que también, aparte de todo el sufrimiento que vivieron, le producimos más sufrimiento todavía, ¿sí? Esta es una vía intraósea, es para hacerle fluidos y es porque el animal estaba deshidratado. Y por si eso no fuera poco, a veces las personas que venden piensan que el loro no es lo suficientemente lindo. Esto es un ñandai, debería tener la cabeza negra. Y acá están desteñidos con agua oxigenada. Como pueden ver en estas fotos, a veces llegan con la piel también toda quemada por el agua oxigenada. Y hablando un poco de bienestar, cuando las autoridades sí hacen su trabajo, muchas veces yo miro estas fotos y pienso que inclusive cuando hacemos el trabajo de confiscar o de incautar, no pensamos en el bienestar. Imagínense estas aves acá siendo capturadas de esta forma, tampoco tienen bienestar en ese momento de la confiscación. La captura es muy brusca, no se tiene mucho en cuenta el bienestar animal, tampoco en estas situaciones. Entonces, en Paraguay, como dije, por la abundancia de especies que hay, muchas personas ni siquiera saben que están amenazados y tampoco saben todo lo que ellos sufren, sobre todo en las zonas donde hay mayor abundancia y donde el tráfico es mayor. La mayoría de los loros en cautiverio viven poco en comparación a lo que vivirían si están mejor cuidados o si viven en vida libre. Y esto es por todos los problemas de salud y todos los problemas que tienen en el manejo en cautiverio. Entonces terminan viviendo muy poco porque se enferman muy rápido y mueren. Eso lleva otra vez a la necesidad de que la persona que tenía un loro quiera otro en muy corto tiempo, porque en 2 o 3 años se murió su loro y entonces ya quiere otro. Muchas personas ven a los loros como objetos, no como seres vivos con dignidad. Entonces, esas formas que les mostré en esas jaulas tan pequeñas demuestran que realmente es un objeto para ellos y no piensan en el sufrimiento. Y en Paraguay y en Latinoamérica en general, por todo lo que vimos, y en todo el mundo realmente, se necesita mucha educación para que los loros dejen de sufrir. Entonces, eso es lo que quería compartir con ustedes y que ayudemos para parar esta crisis. Gracias.
Okay, I was just going to ask if I should stop the presentation, but she finished. I hope you were able to get enough out of that. Sunny, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but since you speak Spanish, did you understand enough that you could kind of summarize what her main point or points were?
Well, a lot of it, she was saying they have so many parrots in Paraguay and they're all over the place. And she made a comparison of what the day looks like for a parrot living in the wild and what it looks like for a parrot in captivity. And in captivity, they're very bored. They don't have a lot during the day. And in the wild, like they spend like 50% flying around and looking, foraging for food, and 30% like playing. And, you know, there is a really huge difference there. She was showing pictures of the birds in cages. She did say in Paraguay that you can keep parrots as pets, but you have to register that you have them. But even though they do have that, people don't respect them or treat them as objects instead of beings with dignity, and that they're not kept well. And she showed pictures of how they're kept in cages. And she said also, I guess the environmental police or the agency that goes and checks on the parrots, they if they go into take parrots away or get parrots that are being trafficked, that they're very brusque with how they handle the parrots and they don't treat them very well. She said basically, she said people don't understand that they're threatened and they don't understand that they do suffer as a species. She said in captivity they live less. And she said basically all over the world and in Paraguay, they need to educate everyone about the parrots. And there needs to be a lot more education in South America. So that was kind of the gist of it, I think.
That was very thorough. Thank you so much. That's great. I also want to point out that Ron put in the chat a little more about his background with parrots specifically. I do want to invite Richard as well to, Richard, I don't think you've had the opportunity to introduce yourself before, what your connection is with parrots. If you're there. Maybe Richard stepped away, so I'll try him again later. Okay, we're now going to move on to a speaker from an organization that One Earth works with very closely, Foster Parrots. They're located in Rhode Island in the US. And we're going to be hearing from the director of their sanctuary, Amanda Coleman. Okay, so here we go again. Give me a second. Whoops, not yet. To share my screen.
Thank you very much for sharing that. It's really important information. We appreciate it. Our next speaker is going to be Amanda, who is the Sanctuary Director at Foster Parrots, and she's responsible for the operations at the New England Exotic Wildlife Sanctuary, to share some information with us about her experiences and her work.
Hello, everyone. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Excellent, thank you. Thank you so much for having me here today, and thank you all for joining us for this really important conference. In this brief next 10 minutes, I will discuss some of the atrocities I have bared witness to of parrots in captivity. And a lot of this has already been said, and I'm just going to kind of reiterate a lot of what was previously said from our other presenters. Parrots in the United States are the 4th most popular pet, with an estimated nearly 9 million homes housing parrots in the United States alone. Parrots are rehomed on average 7 to 11 times in their lifespans in human care, and an average of 2 to 3 times before they have even hit sexual maturity. The number of requests placed on parrot rescue organizations is simply untenable. On average, Foster Parrots receives between 700 to 1,000 requests annually. Last year, in 2023, we received 769 requests for surrender. If you find that number shocking, well, it gets worse. As of October 1st, we have already received 900 requests for surrender. On this slide, you will see some of the birds we have brought into our rescue and their reasons for surrender. Buddy, a dusky conure, was surrendered due to excessive screaming. Buddy lived in a single home for nearly 20 years. He was fed an improper diet of fatty seeds and not allowed out of his cage ever. And because of this, he became prone to feather destructive behavior. Upon arrival at our organization and vetting, Buddy was found to have been suffering from severe visceral gout. Buddy, unfortunately, lost his battle only 2 months after his arrival at Foster Parrots. This is not uncommon. The reasons for surrender range from excessive noise, destructiveness of the home environment, bonding with only one member of the family, not having enough time to properly care for the parrots in their homes, and commonly the death of their guardians. But most commonly, it is the parrot's innate natural behaviors which land them with us at Foster Parrots. Parrots are simply incompatible in a human home. This is the harm to parrots in captivity. This is the parrot crisis. Unfortunately, we are not only seeing an increase in the number of surrender requests filed, but also an increase in the number of birds needing assistance from the same households. It is common for us to receive requests for 2 to 3 birds from the same home, but this year we're seeing an uptick from multiple birds, 6, 12, 20, 100 even, needing assistance from the same households. Last year, we responded to a hoarding case in New Hampshire of 100 or nearly 100 parakeets. These birds all were bred from a single pair of parakeets purchased from a pet store. When the guardians reached out for help, they went to a pet store and said, "What can I do to stop the breeding of the birds in my home?" And the pet store turned to them and said, "You can tape up the holes of the nest boxes and let all of the birds die." Of course, the family was disheartened to hear this and stopped reaching out for help. This caused an increase in the breeding in their home, and before they knew it, they had 99 birds, well, really over 99 birds. We rescued 99 birds from that situation, but there were so many more that had been passed away in the seed on the floor of the home. Rescues across the nation are filling up, and many of us have waiting lists for entry. We absolutely positively cannot adopt or rescue our way out of this mess. The only answer is to stop the breeding of parrots in captivity. We need to stop the trade, stop the demand. This is the harm to parrots in captivity. Please help us stop the parrot crisis. Please help us end the life of cages for birds. Being rehomed over and over again isn't the only harm we are witnessing to parrots in captivity. Stress-related behaviors caused from improper care, improper enrichment, not enough socialization between other birds and flock members of the humans in the household, improper diet. These are all direct contributors to a myriad of psychological and physiological health conditions. Parrots are behaviorally incompatible in a human home, but they are also psychologically incompatible too. Here at Foster Parrots, we are seeing an abundance of birds with self-mutilating behaviors like feather and skin mutilation and other stereotypies. Many of these behaviors are anxiety-driven and become habitual, making them incredibly difficult to break. This again is the harm to parrots in captivity, and this again is the parrot crisis. In addition to the psychological harm captivity inflicts on parrots, we are also seeing systemic harm to their body systems. We've taken a creature who should be flying miles and miles a day and have taken them and locked them into a 2-foot cage, if they're lucky. Captive parrots are sedentary, often with diets high in fat and with unusable calories. This translates to heart disease, atherosclerosis, liver disease, and cardiac disease. All of these are extremely common reasons for the death of parrots in captivity. Even with a well-researched diet and plenty of out-of-cage time, the diet and exercise that we humans can offer can never, ever come close to being able to replicate their intended life and their intended needs. Parrots are flying machines. They have larger hearts relative to body ratio. They have hollow bones to make them virtually weightless and aerodynamic feathers to help them fly. When we remove the one defining activity that was clearly nature's evolutionary objective, the unavoidable outcome is a systematic breakdown. This is the harm to parrots in captivity, and again, this is the parrot crisis. Pet retailers and the breeding community and organizations that promote the idea that parrots are pets are complicit in the suffering and death of millions of parrots every year on a global scale. We are urging you to stop. We are urging you as a community to help us stop this pet trade. There can be no compromise in this, as they are the primary contributors to this parrot crisis. Parrots are wild animals who were never intended for life under the confines of a human care. Parrots are clearly suffering in captivity, and until we stop buying, until we stop breeding, and until we stop selling parrots, the suffering of parrots is going to continue. This suffering is felt by all parrots in captivity, despite our best efforts to care for them. We cannot replicate the wild, natural lives parrots were meant to have. We cannot replicate this in a captive setting. This suffering is felt by not only the parrots in captivity, but animal care rescue workers, conservationists, activists, and veterinarians dedicated to the protection and the advocacy of parrots. I implore you all today to help us end the suffering of parrots, help us end captivity, help us end the parrot crisis, and help us spread the word that there should be no more birds in cages. Thank you all for joining us today.
Thank you so much for that.
Okay, just want to take another pause. If anyone wants to maybe, well, first of all, Richard, are you there this time? I wanted to give you the opportunity to introduce yourself if you want to. And if not, does anyone have stories they want to share similar to what we're hearing from these different presentations? I mean, there's a definite theme running through all of them. Catherine, I see you unmuted.
Yes, I have a question because it's not mentioned in our video, or we are not talking about that a lot, but what do you think about the free flight? Because in Europe, for example, in France, there's a lot of people who are saying that the captivity could be, well, can be a great thing for parrots because they are doing free flight with them. And they excuse the captivity on that a lot and a lot. And they are really, how can I say? Well, they fight for this idea, you know? So it's pretty hard to confront them. Like, what do you think about that? I mean,
well, that's interesting because I'm not that familiar with that issue. I have seen the video here or there of people. I don't know what they do. They take them outside and let them fly, and then the birds are trained to come back, and then they stick them in a cage when they're home. Is that how it works?
they actually don't have cage in Europe because the winter is pretty warm compared to Canada or the north of the US. But they mostly have big. I'm trying to find the word in English once again.
Maybe an outdoor cage, a big
Yes, the big outdoor.
aviary.
Yeah,
Aviary?
exactly. Every year, yeah, exactly. They used to have a lot of aviary, and they do free flight. So they just put their birds outside. They fly outside all day, or sometimes it's more stricter, sometimes not. But I mean, for example, if you go on Facebook, there's Margot Demon. That's one of the like she do like training for people. All our video is about that. So she is like a pro captivity because she said that it's possible to respond all the needs of the parrot with this kind of life, etc., etc. So
Well, two things. If you could put a link to that in the chat, that would be great because I'd like to take a look at it. The first thing that comes to my mind is that it might be a better way for birds that are kept in captivity to live. I don't know. I'd have to. Laura Kim couldn't make it obviously today. I'm going to ask her that question and try to bring an answer next time because she is an avian veterinarian, but it's not helping with the idea of parrots are going extinct in the wild because of the demand for them as pets. So that's only going to increase the demand for them as pets. And how many people could really take care of parrots that way? Probably not that many. They may see the videos and go, oh, doesn't that look great? But the reality is, are you going to build a huge aviary in your backyard? Are you going to take the time to train your bird to do that? Most likely people will have good intentions and then probably not be able to give the birds really what they need. So it's misleading. Here in the US, there's something called Parrot Kindergarten. I don't know how many of you have heard of Parrot Kindergarten. And in some ways, she's doing some great work because it's based on probably the work of Dr. Irene Pepperberg and others on how smart these birds are and how you can stimulate them by learning to communicate with them. She uses tablets a lot. I even signed up for it to think, well, maybe I can make things even a little better for Dusty than they are. But he's too old. He doesn't see well. And a lot of it's based on visual. The bird needs to be able to see. So I couldn't do it. But it will enrich the lives of birds that are already in captivity, and it will help those of us who are parrot guardians who want to make their lives better. But for every one of us, how many others are out there who either don't know about it, don't care, don't have the time or the money? I mean, it wasn't cheap to enroll in a subscription with her. Yeah, Sunny, I see you're, and I was too, because we want to enrich, we care about our birds and we want to enrich their lives, and why not if you can? But on the other hand, it just makes it look even more desirable to have a parrot as a pet. And that goes directly against the message we're trying to get out, which is they should never be pets, whether they're in a big cage, a small cage, allowed to fly, not allowed to fly. It doesn't matter. They're not meant to be in captivity, and it's driving their extinction in the wild. So that would be my answer to that question. Yeah.
And maybe if I can add to this topic, there's a lot of problem about that practice, in my opinion. First of all, since I'm a biologist, it's not something we want people to set captive animals free in our wildland. So that's a problem about maybe invading species, introducing pathogens in the environment. So that's all a big problem. But when it comes to talk about biodiversity with those people, it's really, really difficult, since they don't get this message at all. Furthermore, this helps encouraging bad practice in breeding, especially hen raising, because when birds are hen raised, it's supposedly they come back more, but that's a big problem. So they encourage that industry. That's an industry. So people see videos of free flight parrot, and they're like, wow, that's so wonderful, and then I want to go buy a little baby hen raised bird. And often they're big species like macaws, and especially blue-throated macaws. That's a species really endangered in the wild. And so there's a lot of bad messages with this practice, and it's something that I really am concerned about. And here in Quebec, there's no one who's really giving course about it. So people just like, oh wow, that's beautiful, and then open the door and let the birds fly, and then birds get lost, gets maybe crashed in the windows. A lot of them dies. A lot of them don't find their way home, and they're drowning. Well, it's really a bad message, and it, like you said, it doesn't help the fact that we don't want to have parrots that are pets. So yeah, I think free fly is a big issue, and it's becoming more and more popular these years. So maybe you can get a look at it. In Europe, it's really a big problem, and I'm really concerned that it will be here too eventually.
Yeah, thank you for raising our awareness about that, because see, even parrot people don't necessarily know it all. Did you want to say something, Richard? I saw you unmuted before. Okay, so we're going to go to our last speaker now. Her name is Liz Cabrera Holtz. She's from World Animal Protection. And then we can have any final questions or comments and wrap up. Okay, here I go again.
Fantastic message and great words. We really, really appreciate that. Our next speaker will be Liz Cabrera, who will be speaking to us from her role overseeing World Animal Protection's U.S. campaigns protecting wild and farm animals from abuse. And she leads World Animal Protection's work to end the sale of animals in pet stores.
Thank you. Can you hear and see my screen all right?
Yes.
Wonderful. So hi, everyone. My name is Liz Cabrera Holtz, and I'm an attorney and the Senior Campaigns Manager at World Animal Protection. As we just heard, Pet stores are driving the parrot crisis in the United States. Hundreds of thousands of parrots are pushed through a deadly pipeline from breeding mill to dealer to pet store every year. My presentation explains what's happening to parrots in pet stores and what we can do to shut this industry down. So first, who are we talking about? Which kinds of parrots are being sold in large quantities at pet stores? These are the parrots typically found at places like Petco and PetSmart and other chains: parakeets, cockatiels, conures. And at the bottom, I've also included the other bird species we typically see on parrots who are typically sold. These birds are grossly mismarketed, with many labeled as beginner or easy. Easy is the actual term that Petco uses for parakeets, and that's deceptive advertising is another reason that so many parrots are relinquished. Pet stores are driving bird sales. According to the American Veterinary Medical Association, which conducts a massive survey on animals used for companions in the US, pet stores or pet shops are the #1 source for birds, and that's followed by a friend or a relative. And many of those animals were initially purchased at stores as well. Unfortunately, the biggest pet store chains in North America all sell birds and other animals. So that's PetSmart and Petco, by far the largest, then Pet Supplies Plus, Pet Value, and Pet Supermarket. So it's fair to say that these stores hold much of the responsibility for the parrot crisis. Pet stores source animals from guinea pigs to bearded dragons to parrots from commercial breeding facilities, mills, as well as dealers that also import animals. These mills are just like puppy mills, but with other species. They breed large numbers of animals in low welfare conditions. The goal is to produce as many animals as cheaply as possible. Both undercover investigations from PETA and government inspections by the US Department of Agriculture have uncovered extreme suffering, such as decomposing animals among living animals, cannibalization, animals unable to access water, severely injured and ill animals with open wounds, missing limbs, scabbing, diarrhea, and eye abnormalities. And this is true for species across the board. But turning our focus to parrots specifically, these birds are coming from mills where thousands of birds are being held in rows of bearing cages without adequate enrichment or veterinary care. These parrots are being farmed. They don't come from living homes where people are caring for each individual bird. They're coming from, the equivalent of factory farms. Now, until recently, the USDA did not even regulate bird mills. As we heard from a previous speaker, we now have new regulations for birds in commerce. So now many of these bird mills are licensed, and we can see how many birds they have, which kinds of birds, and the inspection reports online. So this is a screenshot of a recent inspection report. This is a mill in Oklahoma that has 2,000 parakeets. They were recently cited by the US Department of Agriculture for keeping birds in an extremely hot barn. Inspectors found a heat index of 110 degrees. There were multiple dead birds inside the barn, and other birds were visibly in distress. These mills are huge, particularly the parakeet mills. These mills tend only to breed parakeets. Sometimes you see mills with multiple species, and they breed them in the thousands. So one hot spot for parakeet mills is central Oklahoma. And just in this 12-mile strip you can see on your screen, there are 13 different licensed parakeet mills. And in those mills, there are 52,000 plus parakeets. And on the right is a photo of the largest mill in that area. And those barns you can see have 8,000 parakeets in them. And I share those numbers with you so you can see, what we're up against. This crisis will continue until we stop pet store sales, because the birds in that barn are going to Petco and PetSmart and places like them. Once they're in the pet store, the treatment of birds varies considerably. Obviously, it's not a good situation, even in the best of circumstances. But I wanted to share one bird's story. Little Buddy was a 1-year-old black-capped conure who died shortly after leaving a Petco in Madison, Alabama. She looked really ill. Multiple customers had to complain for weeks that she looked sick, but the store wouldn't take her to an avian vet. Eventually a necropsy was done, and it had been determined that obviously she had been ill for some time with chronic weight loss. Interestingly, according to the documents that Petco provided with the bird, little Buddy was born at Sun Pet, which is a notorious animal dealer and Petco supplier, where countless animals from hamsters to birds have suffered and died. On the right of your screen is an investigative article from Vice News about how poor working conditions at PetSmart are killing animals. This was a report my organization, World Animal Protection, participated in, but it was led by actually a labor rights group called United for Respect. PetSmart employees have shared how they were, they requested sick animals be taken to the vet, but they were denied because they said it wasted money. Or told it was wasted money, how insufficient staffing is leading to these freezers of overflowing freezers with dead animals, and that's the photo you see, and more. So I know I've just shared a lot of distressing information, but there are things we can do. I believe this is a solvable problem, at least this piece. So we're taking two approaches here. First, you can campaign directly against pet stores like PetSmart and Petco and ask them to stop selling birds, or, our campaign includes all animals. These photos are from a 2022 action where we had people deliver packets to PetSmart stores across the country asking that they stop selling animals. We had a mobile truck also circling PetSmart's headquarters in Phoenix. And we have an ongoing postcard campaign where you can sign up and I'll mail you postcards and then you mail them to headquarters and stores asking them to stop selling animals. Next, and what I'm most excited about, are the retail pet sales bans. More than 400 cities and 7 states have banned the sale of dogs and cats and sometimes rabbits in pet stores. But most animals sold in pet stores today are not dogs and cats. They're small mammals like guinea pigs and hamsters. They're reptiles like bearded dragons and red-eared sliders, which is a kind of aquatic turtle, amphibians, fishes, and of course, birds. So expanded retail pet sales bans ban the retail sale of all of these animals. So far, there's 3 cities with full or nearly full bans. Cambridge, Massachusetts passed the first in 2017 that banned the retail sale of mammals, birds, reptiles, amphibians, and arachnids. Tarantulas are often sold at these stores. Washington, D.C., where I'm from, they passed a similar law in 2022. And then Arlington, Massachusetts passed an almost identical law in 2024, but instead of arachnids, they included fishes, which is amazing considering the extent and number of fishes abused in the aquarium industry. Then around 13 other cities have retail bans on species other than dogs, cats, and rabbits. You might have seen in the news recently that Boston, New York City, in the last year banned the sale of guinea pigs. And then Ferndale, Michigan, for example, banned the sale of birds, ferrets, frogs, reptiles, rabbits, or rodents. So I encourage you to consider joining a corporate campaign, asking PetSmart and Petco to stop selling birds and animals. There's plenty of ways to get involved. My organization, PETA, Foster Parrots, the Avian Welfare Coalition, there are a lot of groups working on this right now. Second, you can work with your local legislators, rescue groups, and shelters to pass a retail pet sales ban in your community. We have some resources on our website, and after I'm finished speaking, I'll put a lot of links in the chat. We have a toolkit on retail pet sales bans. We also have a 1-page policy concept specifically designed to introduce legislators to this issue. And we also actually have, not legislative, but we have an activity book for children that explains, why these wild animals, why the animals you typically see in pet stores are not pets, are not companions. So I believe that ending the sale of parrots and birds in pet stores is absolutely critical to ending the crisis. We won't change people's minds about birds as pets, about birds in cages, as long as you can drive to any strip mall in the United States and see a dozen parakeets being sold at a PetSmart. And we won't stop the crisis if mills continue to pump tens of thousands of parakeets and other birds into the retail industry every year. So please reach out to me if you want to work on an expanded retail pet sales ban or on pet store advocacy generally. My email is on the screen, and I'd love to collaborate or just hear about what you're doing. Thank you.
Thank you, and to all the speakers. It's excellent information. It's really important. We really appreciate you taking the time to share this information with us.
Okay, I know this is a lot and it can be quite overwhelming and disheartening, but we did ask the speakers when they could to end with positive actions you can take, and I hope you did get some of that. A couple of things I just want to mention. I do urge you all, if you are at all concerned about this, want to help in any way, even a small way, to join the International Alliance for the Protection of Parrots. And let me just, before I forget, put these links that I've been promising into the chat. First, here's the bios for the speakers. And then the Alliance's website is here. Also, I'm going to give you my email address. If you would like to join, one thing we're trying to do right now with IAPP, we just had a meeting, is to get more people to join our Slack platform, where we have a number of channels on all different areas, including people who work in rescues and sanctuaries. And if you email me, I'll send you an invitation to join our Slack group. We're trying to get people more involved there. We just started a group. If any of you are artists of any kind, we just started a group for people who are visual artists, music, writers, and so on, to use the arts to help get the word out. But there's a lot, there's by regions, Asia, North America, so on and so forth, where we're hoping people can start to connect and work with people near them on these issues. And in March, we're going to be starting a social media campaign. The original idea is to have a Parrot Crisis Awareness Day. There was some talk of making it a week instead of a day, and for everyone to flood social media, particularly Instagram, but possibly Facebook or some other platforms, with this message. So if you feel like you'd like to be a part of that, there'll be more information about it, both on the website and on Slack. Next week, we're going to be focusing on how the parrot trade harms people. And then the week after that is the last session, where it's going to focus on how it harms ecosystems and the environment. So thank you so much for being here. Are there any final questions or comments you'd like to make before we sign off for the day? And Catherine put something in the chat. Should they make images to represent and denounce? Yes, actually, there's a group called Laura Sin Fronteras, which Laura Kim helped start, and they're focused on parrots in Mesoamerica, Central America, and they had a campaign also of graphics only in Spanish that was pretty successful. They reached about 1 million people. So, and you saw in Mexico from the presentation last week, that they got a full ban on selling parrots or bringing them into the country. So that would be the ideal anywhere, right? So not that it's perfect, but it's a great start. So next week, by the way, you'll be hearing from someone from Africa. So this is truly a global movement. Unlike a lot of, like I said before, unlike a lot of animals, parrots reach most of the globe, both in the wild and in captivity. So they cover all kinds of animal conservation and welfare issues that if we can really raise people's awareness about parrots, it will help other species as well. So I'm so happy you're here, and you can unmute and say goodbye, and I hope to see you all here next week.
Take care,
Bye,
everybody.
everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for being
Bye.
here. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.